All right, we're ready.
All right.
Good afternoon and welcome to Black on Both Sides Politics with Robert and Malik. I want to thank all of you for tuning in. So we're doing what a lot of people are doing, which is starting some of these online webcasts so that we can get up to the minute, up to date information out, not really having to depend on the mainstream media and mainstream news. Malik, how are you doing?
Pretty good, brother. How are you? It's a lot of stuff we have going on around here.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting time to be involved in politics and to be involved in the political cycle, because what we're seeing is a news cycle that moves at lightning speed. So I wanted to get your take as the Republican on the Black on Both Sides panel. What do you think about the president's press conference a couple, maybe 30 minutes ago, where he announced he's canceling his Jacksonville rally? He supports his second stimulus payment with Ted Cruz and Rand Paul are against. He's taking the capital gains tax out of his stimulus proposal. It seems like he's now backtracking on many of the things that he was campaigning on earlier. What do you take of that?
Well, I think that's the reality of being president of the United States. One of the things that Donald Trump, we can admit that Donald Trump is pretty stubborn and he will hold the line as long as he can. But as far as the convention is concerned, it makes absolutely perfect sense for him to do that. So for two reasons. For one is because of the health concerns. There are true health concerns that people had about the virus. And we see what's going on in Florida now. And I was very doubtful that between now and the time of the convention, I think maybe starting on the 28th, or I forgot when the actual date is, but I doubted very seriously whether we were going to be in a position for that type of thing to happen down there in Florida. The second part of that is that this helps Donald Trump politically, because if Donald Trump, because he didn't need another Tulsa, and that's exactly where we were going. If he decided to have the convention, if there were additional cases, or even if there weren't any additional cases that came out of that, people were going to criticize him. So it didn't really make much sense to cancel for the DNC to cancel its convention, but then for the RNC to move ahead with the GOP convention. So I think it's a great move by him. There are certain things that he's going to have to back off on, and I think that when you were mentioning about the stimulus bill, so not just really the capital gains tax, from what I just heard about 20 minutes ago, the idea of a payroll tax is dead as far as
Yeah.
McConnell is concerned. And so that's one of the things that Donald Trump was really pushing, but it doesn't seem like that the ball is moving forward in that direction at all. So this is one of those instances where the president, as he has in the past, but the president is going to compromise. It's not going to look good. It's not going to be pretty PR, because there are going to be people who will criticize him and say, look at him. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's all over the place. I can see the ads going now. But as far as politically and the health reasons, I think this just makes perfect sense.
Well, why didn't he just do this 6 months ago? We've known what was going to happen 6 months ago. That when the as soon as the virus hit, or so rather 5 months ago, we knew a month in that wearing masks was a good thing. We knew that this was not just going to blow over. We knew that there was not going to be live in-person events. Scientists and major leaders were saying until 2021, but Republicans have simply been in denial. There's an entire COVID-19 truther movement out there on the far political right. They call it there's the pandemic documentary. They call it the scamdemic. Why are there so many Republicans who refuse to believe the medical science? And the fact that they made Dr. Fauci, of all people, public enemy number one, as if he's against Trump by simply stating the medical facts.
Well, I don't think that it's so we shouldn't be surprised that there's a level of tribalism that goes on here. And that's pretty much on both sides. Democrats are criticizing Republicans for situations in which they feel as if we're not taking the virus seriously. There are many, and in fact, most people that I know took the virus seriously. The political apparatus that we have, and I think that's probably where a lot of the we kind of part ways, is that there was a lot of politics involved in this. So Donald Trump, in many ways, he was pushing back on a lot of the criticism that he was getting early on. Obviously, there were many things that the government could have done that they should probably, well, not probably, that they should have done that they didn't. But for me, and I've told people this so many times before, we don't live in a land of Shangri-La where our government is perfect. I can't think of an instance where our federal government has responded to something that was immediate, to something that was a natural disaster, a first time, if you will. I can't think of an instance where our federal government has performed well. It's a lot of bureaucracy, it's a lot of red tape. There are a lot of things that we did not know at the beginning of the virus that we know now. There are a lot of things, even if you listen to Governor Cuomo himself, there are a lot of things that he learned from the pandemic. And I think moving forward, we're going to continue to learn these lessons. But why the president why the president decided that, he was going to push back on a lot of things, why he wasn't out and wearing masks. I actually think that part, as far as the mask wearing, it's probably was more so ego than anything else. The appearance of Donald Trump wearing a mask and people thinking that it's a sign of weakness. But the reality is if you look at the picture that he posted with the black mask on and the subsequent picture that he posted, Donald Trump, it's not a sign of weakness. And so the people who were the COVID, what did you call them again?
The COVID truthers, the ones there's legitimately, and I guarantee they'll be commenting on this on social media. There's legitimately a group of people who think this is all made up. They will post quote unquote facts saying that the numbers are inflated, the numbers of deaths are fake, the scientific evidence isn't real scientific evidence. There are the people who are still pushing the hydroxychloroquine myth as if that's a real thing. Up until right now, we now have actual medicines that help with the virus. We have remdesivir. We have the steroidal treatments that have been very effective. We have Moderna is working on a vaccine. There's a UK vaccine study. So now we have actual real medicine that has been scientifically proven that is helping, and they still want to somehow push this myth that hydroxychloroquine is going to work. So if you have people who refuse to believe in reality itself, that's what makes it so difficult to prevent the spread, because people just don't believe it's real.
Well, yeah, but to that point, if we and I compare your COVID truthers to the anti-vaxxers, there's a whole slew of people who are out there from the West Coast to the East Coast who are anti-vaccine people. I think that was the measles, maybe last year or maybe the year before last, the measles outbreak that was in New York. Part of that was attributed to I can't think of, maybe it was the Orthodox Jewish community in New York. There were some of the things that were attributed to that, but there are people who are against the anti-vax movement, as well as the COVID truthers. Now, I think the COVID truthers, these people are likely the ones who they don't believe in, they don't support things like government overreach. They feel as if that this individualism is taking away from our liberty, probably a bit of libertarianism in there. But we know that most of the people who were against it, at least publicly, were those who were in support of Donald Trump. But at the same time, the people who were just saying that we're just not going to wear them, period, we're not going to listen to any politician. I've seen many of that in my own community as well. So it's not simply something that the COVID truthers are doing on the right. There are many people, even on the left, who may not be as vocal, and we don't see that sort of criticism of them. But there are many, I can point to many people that I know who say that this virus thing is not a big deal for me, and they go about their day.
Well, it's interesting. I want to transition on that point that you just made about this libertarian strain in the Republican Party. There's always, as long as I can remember, as long as you can remember, we've always talked about this idea of Republicans being against big government, against government overreach, against jackbooted government thugs coming to drag people away into black vans in the middle of the night. And now we have actual jackbooted government thugs dragging people away in the middle of the night in cities like Portland, and we're threatening to send more federal agents into cities around the country, and Republicans are supporting. Explain this logical syllogism to me. How is it that you can both be for small and limited government, against governmental overreach? You're stockpiling ammo, you got your bug out bag, your prepper kit, all of these things just in case big government comes to take you away. And then Trump sends big government into cities to take people away, and they say, yeah, look, Trump's doing what he has to do.
So I think we should make a distinction between what happened in Portland and what happened in both Kansas and what's getting ready to happen now in Chicago. I haven't seen any Republicans who have come out in support of the kidnapping and a lot, well, I'm assuming alleged kidnapping, I should say that, and all of those other things that were going, essentially rogue. You had rogue actors. I think I was looking at a videotape of it was a guy in a Navy shirt. He was just standing there, but the officer, the agent or officer or whomever that was just sitting there hitting them with the baton. Now, those type of things, and I haven't seen anyone endorse that. But when we're talking about why Republicans are supportive of similar efforts, it's really as we're going back talking about law and order. And we know since this has been going on, the Chop Zone and other things that have been happening there in Portland, it seems like now Portland is ironically, Portland is ground zero for this type of movement, this anti-police movement. And there are many things there that they've been doing in Portland that they have not done elsewhere. Now, when we move on to both Kansas and Chicago, we saw today that the Chicago's mayor said, okay, well, you guys can come in because now she has a better understanding. A lot of the media, what we were talking about, everyone was thinking about Portland. And those things, that's something that we should be concerned about. But it wasn't just Portland, it was Kansas City. And Kansas City is serving as the model for what's getting ready to happen in Chicago.
But what don't we always hear from Republicans? States' rights, small government, local control, no one-size-fits-all solution. We don't want the federal government interfering in local politics. What exactly are the morals and values of the Republicans at this point? Because it seems to be the Republicans believe in whatever it is that Donald Trump says they believe in. I can only imagine what would have happened if Barack Obama had sent federal troops to arrest Tea Party members with black vans and unmarked military personnel snatching up folks in the middle of the night. I'm trying to figure out exactly. It seems like the Republican Party's values are just jello. Whatever Donald Trump says they believe in on this day, that's what they believe in now.
No, I don't think that's it at all. We can look at even many things that are Democrats, the things that they've been supportive of or against, for that matter, for the 8 years of Obama. Now they're not so keen on those, or they're in support of things that they were not supportive of then. With this. And again, I should say that Republicans are not cheering or not praising any of the negative things that we saw as far as the agents or officers or whoever they were. Republicans aren't there cheering that. But when it comes to law and order, yes. And I think to your original point, you asked why. Well, that would be suggesting that there is no such thing as hypocrisy in politics. Of course it is. I don't think this has anything to do with Donald Trump per se. I think this has to do with Republicans who are for law and order. What I know, that there are many people who've been asking, not just Chicago, but in places like DC, what we're seeing and what's getting ready to happen in Chicago, they're similar to things that we saw in Baltimore and even DC, where the local officials have said, well, we will allow the federal government to come in. And in this case, where what's happening in Chicago, we're going to have FBI agents, DEA agents, ATF agents. They're going to be helping, assisting local law enforcement and not just apprehending some of these suspects, but trying to get guns off the street. So there are a lot of things that, as far as the law and order is concerned, that Republicans are for with this. But yes, Republicans are hypocritical, Democrats are hypocritical, but when it comes to law and order, these communities need help now. And I think that's where the federal government can step in and assist local law enforcement, not take over, not infiltrate, not anything like that, but assist local law enforcement in really trying to bring down this crime.
Malik, when the hell have Republicans been in favor of getting guns off the street? The Republicans are the party of constitutional carry. There's supposed to be no governmental regulations. They should be bringing guns into Chicago so that law-abiding citizens can be able to protect themselves against the gangbangers and thugs. That's Republican Party pedagogy for the last half century. And now they're talking about getting guns off the street. And let's understand that the sudden spike in crime nationwide, we know what happened. George Floyd was killed Memorial Day. We had nationwide protests. Then the officers were actually charged with murder. The officers who murdered Ahmaud Arbery were charged with murder. We saw police accountability measures go in place across the country. And then we saw police slowdowns. We saw blue flu strike the entire nation. You had mass sick-outs in New York. You had officers in Atlanta not responding to any calls that weren't officer down calls. You had slowdowns in Chicago where officers were simply not going on patrol. And because of these slowdowns, that's what caused the spike in crime. So instead of sending in federal troops, why don't we just go attack these police unions and tell them to do their damn job? Nothing changed between now and 6 months ago that made this happen, except the police not wanting to enforce the law because they do not. They feel like if we can't beat people, we can't do our jobs.
Well, I would disagree with that. And I think we should draw a distinction between why the federal agents are going into Chicago and some of the other places that they're considering, and the protests that happened, that ensued after the George Floyd murder, because we know that's exactly what it was. What Republicans, you asked a question about why are Republicans now in support of getting guns off the street. I've never seen any Republicans come out in favor of illegal guns being on the street. So part of this operation, which is exactly what happened in Baltimore, which is exactly what happened in DC, federal agents came in to try to help local cities in solving these problems. So trying to address some of this. Yes, there's going to be some give and take as we go about that. But as far as these agents going in to assist, what's happening in Chicago, what's happening here in DC, where we have 3-year-olds getting shot, 11-year-olds dying, the same things are happening in Chicago, and the federal agents are there to assist with that, not with the protesters, as they were in Portland. And we should say, in Portland, they were there to actually protect federal buildings. They won't be protecting federal buildings in Chicago. They will be doing things that are consistent with what they've done in cities all around the country and assisting local governments in trying to tamp down crime and many of the other things that are affecting those communities.
But what I don't understand is, so George Floyd is killed. You have nationwide protests to reform policing, to stop police brutality. What people wanted was federal legislation that would address anti-lynching legislation, that would have a new federal hate crimes law, that would take away qualified immunity from police officers. There's a whole suite of legislative changes that can happen on the federal level. There's a whole suite of legislative changes that can happen on the state level. There's a whole suite of legislative change that can happen on the local level to stop people from protesting. The reason people are still protesting months later is because we've got none of that. We've got them cities that want to paint Black Lives Matter on the sidewalk, but keep the same policies in place that lead to the deaths of unarmed African Americans. So instead of actually addressing those issues and addressing those needs, the response from the government is send in the stormtroopers. And I don't see how that's fixing the problem. They want to fix the actual problem, address what the protesters are actually demanding, instead of thinking you can handle more violence.
Well, outside of Portland, we really aren't seeing many protests in reference to police brutality. One of the things that we should know, and I'll push back on this point, it wasn't that the government said, well, we're just going to send in federal agents because there was nothing else that we could do. We know that even back in January, the president created his commission on policing. We also know that there was an executive order that the president actually issued to address some of these issues around policing. We also know that Senator Scott's bill, a bill that probably by 85 to 90%, Democrats actually agreed with. Where we got stuck was on the issue of qualified immunity and the ban on chokeholds. From Senator Scott's mouth himself, he said that he offered Democrats the opportunity to come to the table with up to 20 amendments. Doesn't matter how many you want. And Democrats said no. If you look at the Democratic bill that came out of the House, and if you look at the Senate bill, the similarities are ridiculous. But Democrats decided that they did not want to work with Republicans on this. And so that bill did not advance. So as far as the government's perspective, at least on the Hill, they were actually doing that part. So there's only so many things that the federal government can do. There's only so many things that Congress can do. But most of these things, and if we actually saw that, even before the House bill was passed or even the Senate bill, when they were working on that, what we saw is that there were local jurisdictions, which is, in my opinion, exactly how it should work. There were local jurisdictions that said, fine, we're going to do things like ban chokeholds. But even to the point of banning chokeholds, the chokehold that killed Eric Garner was a banned chokehold. So we can have the chokehold bans, but the problem is that went to a jury, and a jury of the officer's peers did not convict him. So I agree that we should have that sort of ban, but at the same time, that's no guarantee that that's helpful, but that's no guarantee that an officer won't do it, or a jury won't acquit them of doing the very thing that is illegal. And we saw that in the Eric Garner case in New York.
See, part of the problem that I think Washington is having and the elected officials are having is they're still trying to do the political game, the political half step. We'll go a little bit in this direction and see if we can appease these people just long enough to get through the next election and hope that it dies down. The folks who are out here protesting now are not interested in compromise. They're not interested in a half step solution. John Lewis, who just passed, the reason he got involved in activism with SNCC 60 years ago was on the issue of police brutality and over policing in Black communities. And then when he died, we're still working on the same issue. So when young folks, or when the Scott bill is a compromise half step bill that does not go all the way, that is why people rejected it, because they wanted a full solution and not simply the nibbling around the edges, so to say. And that's the reason qualified immunity is so important to that Garner example, because guess what? If the family of Eric Garner is able to go after that cop's pension, is able to go after that cop's house, is able to go after that cop's retirement fund, his stock holdings, is able to go after that cop's kids' college fund, then the next officer will think a whole lot harder when they're about to choke somebody to death over cigarettes than if the city is paying out these settlements to families, because even the city of Chicago has paid out something like $500 million in the last 5 years in police settlements. So I think it's disingenuous for Republicans to say that, well, we tried a little bit to do something and now we couldn't do it, so let's send the stormtroopers in.
Yeah, so it wasn't that Republicans tried a little bit. Republicans tried probably almost 90%. With 90% is not a little bit. The issues, as I'll repeat it again, the issues were qualified immunity and the ban on chokeholds. Those were things that Senator Scott himself said, I pleaded with my Democratic colleagues on the other side to come to the table. Let's have that debate. Let's introduce those amendments. Democrats said, no, we will not do that. So when you say that it's half measure or it didn't go all the way, in politics, there is no such thing as getting everything that you want. So you have to compromise. And if Republicans were saying that there were almost 90% of things that we agreed on, and Democrats said, no, that's just it. If you look at the bill, and I encourage I encourage the thousands who are actually watching us right now, that read the bills side by side, read the House bill and the Senate bill, and you will see that they essentially are virtually the same, with the exception of the ban on chokeholds and the qualified immunity. And I will just add to that ban on chokeholds, and this is where what we do is important. What a lot of people in media do is important. That ban on chokeholds, because I've had this conversation with people and they thought otherwise, the ban on chokeholds applied to federal officers. That's it. So it doesn't apply to the person who kills George Floyd. It doesn't apply to the person who killed Eric Garner. It doesn't apply to them. It applies to federal officers. What's happening in local cities, that's where it actually sticks. But I do agree with you. Go after the pensions. I don't know if the federal government is the proper apparatus to go after pensions in states, but I do believe that states, once you start going after people's pocketbooks, when you hit in the pocket, we saw what just happened with the Washington football team.
What is that? What I think happened, just as a tangent from a lawyer perspective, what probably happened is the name they wanted, somebody bought the trademark to, and they're gonna have to go into a year of litigation to negotiate away from them. And just because camp is coming up, they had to release something, so they came up with Washington football team. Well, so this is gonna be a season played under trademark law.
Yeah, well, that actually is true. And because I was looking a couple of weeks ago when they were talking about this, I looked it up. There is a guy who several years ago trademarked the name, I think it was Washington Warriors, and it was several other names. So that's your legal, you put on your legal hat there, because I think that actually may explain what happened. Because what he was saying is that I think there's something with trademark law where you had to continue something on a yearly basis, whatever that is. I'm not a lawyer, nor do I pretend to be one. But he definitely came out and said that he owned those particular trademarks. And so you may be right. That actually may be what the Washington football team is doing right now.
He's about to get broke off too. But on this same point, why is it that government's response to these issues, to violence and crime in communities, is always to meet violence with violence, to meet force with force. We keep hearing these 1960s terms like law and order, silent majority. These are Nixonian terms. They're terms of art in American politics. When you say law and order, you were specifically citing back to Richard Nixon when he was dealing with people with the Kent State protesters, when dealing with anti-Vietnam protesters. When you say the silent majority, Nixon, one of Nixon's most famous speeches was the silent majority speech, where he discussed the fact that despite what you were seeing in the streets with protests and the student movement and the women's liberation movement and the LGBTQ movement and the civil rights movement, that this silent majority of white people, the white citizens council, those people were still silently the majority, and now we're citing back to this as if that's supposed to be something to give us comfort. Well, why can't we have a forward-looking policy where instead of sending stormtroopers into cities, we say, well, look, the reason we have this level of violence and crime in, let's say, Chicago or West Baltimore is very clear and apparent. It's economic. If you look at the Magnificent Mile, if you look at Evanston, if you look at Gold Coast in Chicago, and then if you look at the Wild Hunnets and the West Side and Cottage Grove and not Stonehenge, nice, and the low ends and those sorts of areas, there's a lack of economic development, economic accessibility, a lack of healthcare, a lack of housing, a lack of education. So we're going to be sending any federal help in instead of sending federal troops or federal agents in to help. Why do we send in these type of federal programs to get people back working? If you look at the West Baltimore compared to the Inner Harbor or Canton or the waterfront, you see the exact same thing. That's the help the cities need, not help to arrest more people.
Well, so two things in response to that. Remember early on, because Donald Trump was getting criticized for wanting to open back up the economy. And what you just essentially said is that we need to open back up the economy because these people need to get back to work. Donald Trump said,
no. These people don't need to get back to work. They need to get to work. These people have been out of work for 2 generations. West Baltimore didn't get run down in the last 6 months. It got run down after Cab Calloway left. I know the South Side of Chicago didn't get run down recently. It got run down since Harold Washington died. So these are the investments we need to be making generationally. One of the promises that Trump made during the campaign was to stop crime in Chicago. And he's done nothing about it until now, wanting to send in federal troops 100 days before the election.
Okay, well, let's be honest about that. There's only so many things that a president of the United States can do to stop crime in states. If that were the case, then the Chicago would be Shangri-La right now. It's not. It's never been, and it wasn't when Obama was in office. Yes, the fact that the president says that I can go in there and do this and do that, yeah, okay, I get it. But the fact is that, yeah, I agree with you. We should, and actually from my perspective, we should have an all hands on deck approach to this. The notion that somehow the economy or a lack of jobs, this is something that's driving all of the crime, I say no to that. I say no, and because this is really about personal irresponsibility. A lot of this, what we're seeing, the people, just like a couple of weeks ago, the young guy who was killed here, young boy who was killed here in DC, the 11-year-old, the 21-year-old who was shot in the head, the 71-year-old who was shot in the head, the many people that are being killed on this street, it has nothing to do with them not wanting a job. And why I say that is because we come from stock. We come from very good stock of people who survived the master's whip on plantations. So the notion that somehow not having opportunities, not having a job, not having resources is the thing that is driving this, I disagree with that. A lot of this is about personal irresponsibility and people not wanting to take control of their lives. I use DC as an example of that. DC has all of the programs that you could want. If you want to get an HVAC certification, IT certification, customer service certification, these things are offered for free. The problem is they don't show up. That has nothing to do with the federal government laying its hand down on a community or even a local or state government doing that. A lot of these people just don't want to move. I tried myself when I was actually in school. We go out and we try to get people to come in to just sign up to get your GED because it's free if you are a DC resident. No bite. They don't want to do it. So we also have to factor in personal responsibility into this discussion about people needing more jobs. That's important, but personal responsibility, from my perspective, is even more important.
So that's always one of those fun terms that Republicans throw out when it has to do with poor people. So when Delta has a record year and makes more money than they've ever made in a year and gives bonuses to their CEOs, but then the economy shuts down for 6 weeks and they run out of money, they run to the government and say, we need $28 billion and we give it to them. We don't say, well, you should have had the personal responsibility to put some money away in case something bad happened.
But
When
they're not
the
killing
hotel,
us though.
well, no, but at the same time, we only have this idea of personal responsibility when it comes to poor people. Rich people, when they have an issue, they go to the government, they get some money, and they keep things rolling. So why is it that the poor people have to somehow find some kind of magical way to lift themselves up by their own bootstraps, but the corporations, the millionaires, the billionaires just go to the piggy bank of the Federal Reserve, get an unlimited check that's written to them, and they float themselves that way? Why can't poor people have that same access to the same governmental resources they're paying into?
Well, this is not about class. This is, for me, this is not about a lack of resources or plenty of resources. The fact is that the reason that we don't have those same discussions is because rich people aren't out there killing 3-year-olds. Rich people aren't.
Oh, I disagree. Because guess what?
No, well,
If the
Robert,
if
look,
the wait, hold on. If the Lockheed Martin stock price drops too low, guess what we do? We find some random ass country to drop bombs on, and guess who dies in those? 3-year-olds who are across the ocean. But
okay,
and
well,
that's
we're
how they
talking
keep
about
themselves.
America.
That's how they keep themselves paid.
Okay,
So I don't think we can pretend that there's a moral equivalency to the way that they kill people and the way that we kill people.
no, it's no moral equivalency at all. The Operation Legend, I can't think of his last name, the 3-year-old who was actually shot as he was sleeping in his bed, that had nothing to do with rich people. It had nothing to do with what the United States does to other countries. That has to do with the personal irresponsibility of the one who actually pulled that trigger. Rich people aren't having those same type of problems as we're having in our neighborhoods. Rich people, middle class people, their communities are safer. Their communities are obviously have more resources. I live in Washington D.C., so I see it all the time. There's a difference. As our mayor wants to paint Black Lives Matter on the street, she lives in the ritzy upper crust part of Northwest D.C. She doesn't see that on this side of town where I live, east of the river, for those of you who don't know, east of the river is like going across the railroad tracks. In Washington, D.C., the Anacostia River is considered our railroad track. So we live east of the river. The things that are happening here, communities are suffering. Parents are saying, we have to do something. We have to do something. I don't think that whether it's federal law enforcement or even local law enforcement, I don't think that is the ultimate answer, that this is obviously going to solve all of the problems. It's a component, it's a helpful component, but it's not something that's just going to, we're going to wake up and say, well, as long as we have more rec centers, because I can tell you, DC has that. So rec centers, programs, all of that, DC has it. Many of these other places have it. A lot of these people aren't taking advantage of it, but I think that there's a lack, especially when it comes from the left, because I was on the left for many years now. So for people on the left, they don't want to talk about that one thing that we know stands true: personal responsibility. And this is something, even in our community, we have to understand that there's a very small percentage of people who are involved in these type of crimes, and you have those who continue to commit the crimes over and over again. But for the most part, most of us are law-abiding citizens. We believe in educating our kids. We want safe communities. We want good food in our grocery stores and things like that. We want things that the same people in these rich communities want, but there's a lack of personal responsibility. And until we start talking about that, and not talking about it, well, you don't like Black people, or you're an Uncle Tom, or you're this, because you're saying, what about us? What about our personal responsibility? What is that one thing? What is that thing that our forefathers, as they were there on plantations, how did they have the Constitution? How did they have that within themselves to say that we're not going to go out and kill each other? They didn't do it, but we're doing it. There are reasons for that, but it certainly just isn't because there aren't enough jobs out there.
Malik, if you look at Reconstruction era newspapers, I can send them to you after we get off air. The exact same complaints were made about Black communities during Reconstruction, where white newspapers would say that there's a Negro rumble on the south side of Atlanta this week, as Blacks destroy their own communities, or as Negroes destroy their own communities. They've always said these things about us, and guess what? Then, as now, it was fights over a lack of access to resources, as you said, and that's just what you said. Middle class people don't have these kinds of problems. So why don't we help make more people middle class, and then fewer people will have these problems? That's what I mean by having a governmental effort to reach out. As you said, the mayor of DC lives in the ritzy part of town. Most of those ritzy people work at government jobs in DC that have access to governmental resources. So what happens when we provide proper housing to people? What happens when we provide proper education, proper access to food, proper health care, mental health resources, transportation resources, an actual causeway out of poverty and into the middle class? That's how you stop violence and stop crime. Just as you said, middle class people don't have these problems because they're not at the fringes of society fighting for these simple aspects of existence. So instead of saying, well, you have to have personal responsibility, okay, great, I got personal responsibility. Is that going to get me, is that going to keep the lights on? Is that going to give me housing? Is that going to help the educational system? Is that going to, in Baltimore, we had this issue where schools didn't have AC, so they had to let students out because the classrooms were too hot. Is that going to be a personal responsibility issue? If you look at Kim Klacing, what she's doing on the West Side, running for Congress, these streets having potholes we can't drive over them. Is that personal responsibility? The city not picking up trash for 20 and 30 years and having condemned buildings. Is that personal responsibility? So there is a governmental aspect to it, and you can't separate that from the conditions that people live in. If you treat people like caged animals, they act like caged animals.
I disagree with that because, again, like I said, well, as you hear,
the dog basically.
Magnus. Like, really? I'm on like live, and this is.
I don't think the dog speaks English.
He's gonna keep going, but I don't think that, and I will repeat, only a small number of us actually are involved in these things, these repetitive crimes and killing people, raping. Only a small number of us are actually out there doing that. So the question is, in the same conditions, because I know many of my neighbors, me for that matter, many of us live in these same conditions. So what is it about us? What's so special about the 85, 90% of us who don't get involved in crime? What's special? Nothing special about us. Even people, I know people in this community right now, they have little to nothing. My parents may be on, welfare. They may not be going to a high-performing school because actually none of the schools in my ward are high-performing schools. What is that magical thing about these parents, these students who are subject to the same sort of conditions, the very same conditions? What's so special about them? Nothing is special about them, but there's a different level of personal responsibility. And I don't think we can separate that. We don't have discussions about personal responsibility. I agree with you. Absolutely. As someone who sees what gentrification and other things has done in DC, absolutely the government should be mindful of well, not even just be mindful, to try to do things to rectify years of systemic racism, when it comes to housing, when it comes to businesses, all of that stuff, even education, all of that stuff is important, which is why I said that we should have an all hands on deck approach as opposed to, well, it's your role, federal government, in bettering our lives. I don't need, and I know many of my friends, those who have jobs, those who don't have jobs, those who are middle class, those who aren't middle class, I don't know many people at all who say, well, we just want government to fix it, because really it's that problem. I think the challenge there, the problem is that for so many years, this is essentially what I've heard. And that's what I heard when I was a Democrat too, that, well, it's the government's fault that people are killing each other on the street because they didn't provide enough rec centers. They didn't provide enough programs. They didn't provide enough violence interruption programs. Yes, the government does have a role, but the government can't fix it all. And until we start having honest discussions about what is your role, because I can tell you in my community, we're having that discussion about personal responsibility. It may not sell well on social media. It may not sell well to the media, but we're having the discussions about after the 11-year-old was killed, and there was a big push behind it, which was almost right after the protest. And unfortunately, I'm so sorry I can't remember the young boy's name, but there was discussions about it, and people said, no, we're going to find you and we're going to turn you in. That's exactly what happened. That's how you can get them off the street. And we can have conversations about what it is our judicial system. There are many people, it was a guy who I think he was 21 years old, shot her in the head. Well, many of the activists here were saying that he should have gotten out, and he did. They let him out of jail. He's 16 years old. 16 years old. They let him out because of COVID concerns. Well, he was in there not just on gun possession charges from years back. He got out of jail, and then he came back and shot this young lady in the head, and she died. That is personal responsibility. And our community said, no, we're not doing that this time around. Yes, all of the things that the government should do is important, but when it comes to that one thing that we know can change the trajectory, that person saying, no, I'm not, bruh, I ain't getting in the car with you. That's over. I'm not getting in the car with you. You whipping, you got all your guns in the car, because I know what you're getting ready to get out to. That somebody needs to be there to tell that person, I'm not rocking with you on that. That's what personal responsibility looks like.
And I agree, but you just said all the schools in your area are low performing. So why don't we start by making those schools no longer low performing? That's a governmental function. How many bullets, you talked about the gun charges. How many bullets are made in the Black community in this country? I mean, how many bullets can you buy that are stamped on the back that say, oh, made by a Black-owned company?
Zero.
How many guns are made by a Black-owned producer in the country? I mean, a Ruger or Sig Sauer or Taurus, any of those things.
Zero.
In the District of Columbia, and the city of Baltimore, and the city of Chicago, in New York, you can't even buy guns for the most part without rigorous requirements. So isn't that a governmental function, the fact that these guns are even getting into these cities?
Yeah, and again, just to make this clear, once again, I'm not saying that government doesn't have a role. You don't want to talk about the personal responsibility aspect. I think that government does have a role. There are things that the government can do, but the government is not the end all be all to solving what's happening in our community. If you don't have a real discussion about personal responsibility, I don't think that this can go anywhere. As I said, DC is a petri dish of this. It's a social experiment of any type of thing that you can want, any type of thing that you can provide, yet still 3-year-olds are getting shot in Washington, D.C.
But not to belabor the point, but I'm just saying that those same kids that you're talking about who are out there shooting and robbing and causing all these violence, I guarantee you gave them a job making $25 an hour, they probably wouldn't be doing that. But on that point, the last thing I think we need to cover is the stimulus program. As we're talking about the government's involvement in stimulating the economy, clearly there is a governmental role, but Republicans seem to be in an internal civil war on what's going to happen on this last round of stimulus funding. You have the payroll tax credit, which is the payroll tax cuts, which is gone. Capital gains tax cuts, which are gone. Another round of $1,200 checks, which are going to be going out to the American people. Why do we keep doing these band-aid solutions, these piecemeal bills, instead of just having an actual strategy on how to deal with this?
Well, this is the first, we've never dealt with this before. In our modern era, we've never dealt with the pandemic such as this, where the economy itself was shut down. So I think, yes, there are a lot of things that we're learning in real time. And I think that we should give government space to actually do that and criticize when necessary. There's a difference between, I think, maybe $2 million. The Republican bill, what they were looking at is something around $1 trillion, while Democrats are saying that we have $3 trillion. But the meat within is pretty much the same. Yes, they're going to take out things like the payroll tax. I don't think that's much of a love lost thing on that. I don't think that the Republicans are any type of civil war behind that. There are things that we know that are going to be a part of the bill. Funding for schools, funding for businesses, and not just funding for business.
Well, hold on. Let's put a pin on that funding for schools part, because the funding for schools is a Trojan horse. What they're saying is, if you open your school up in the fall, we will send you money to put your children in danger. But if you do not open your school up, this is what the president said about an hour ago. If you don't open your school up, then we're going to give parents money to send their kids to private schools or parochial schools. Basically, you're putting school districts over a barrel, forcing them to open up even when they don't think it's safe or proper in order to get federal funding. How is that a compromise?
Well, from what I understand about what's happening in the Senate, what's happening with the GOP bill, and I didn't catch that part of the president's discussion. But what they were talking about is when it comes to funding the schools, it's a lot giving schools the resources that they actually need to reopen. That could be anything from PPE to anything for that matter that the state can't provide themselves, because we know, as we saw during this crisis, there were things that states could not do, that they were not prepared to do, that the federal government is there to supplement, to help them in that way. I don't think that it's a bad thing that the federal government is looking to give money, because they're essentially doing the same thing for businesses. In this bill, in the GOP bill that they're looking at as well, one of the things that they're going to do for businesses is to give money to help them retrofit their establishment for this new norm that we have. And I can imagine there could be anything from dividers to whatever it is. And I think that that's, as far as the funding for the schools, that's something else that can go to the schools. I don't agree with the notion of withholding funds for schools, but at the same time, if you're not open, then I don't know what funds you're actually using to educate our kids. So I don't necessarily agree with parents being able to use the money to go to private schools, because I don't think that that's really an answer, because there are only so few private schools. And I'm sure the admission process for these schools is not just anyone comes in. So I don't agree with that part about giving the money to the parents to send their kids to private schools. I don't think I don't think that's an answer at all.
Yeah, wouldn't a more realistic proposal on for I think it's $150 billion are going to be allocated to schools in order for them to open in the fall. Understanding that realistically most schools aren't opening in the fall, why don't they just allocate that $150 billion to make sure that distance learning works as well as possible, to ensure that we have broadband access for low-income communities, to ensure that we have laptops and Chromebooks for students so they can learn at home? Because it's not a realistic proposal to think we're going to have students in school in the next 2 months when we're currently in a spike. So I think Republicans are still trying to grip with reality. Another thing in the bill, which we are that I think the fight is going to be over, is the next round of direct payments to people, the $1,200 checks, because what Republicans are saying is that they want to cap it at $40,000 and at the same time reduce the amount of unemployment benefits people are getting in order to force low-income workers back into the workforce. Right now, if you make, let's say, $7.25 an hour, if you're getting your $7.25 plus the extra $600 in enhanced unemployment, you're making $15 an hour. So you're not really in a hurry to go back to your corona-filled job and risk getting a deadly disease. And what Republicans want to do is reduce that $600 down to about $125 to force poor people back to getting sick in order to stimulate the economy. I don't see how that's a winning campaign issue.
Well, and listen to what you just said. What you essentially said is the argument that Republicans have actually been making themselves, is that people are making more in this unemployed era than they were in the actual job. The federal government's job is not to give you $15 an hour. The federal government's job is not to supplement, and actually not even just supplement and add to what you made on your previous job. That's not what the unemployment system is for. Anyone, as I've been on unemployment myself, you don't make anywhere, depending on how much money you made, you don't make anywhere near the amount of money that you made in your unemployment that you did on your job. So the notion that somehow people are saying, well, I'm making $15 an hour as opposed to $7 an hour, well, that is something that the federal government and all of us should be concerned about, because it's disincentivizing work. And we shouldn't disincentivize people going back to work, which is the exact point that Republicans have been making all along. But we know, even in that last cycle, Republicans had a cap on the people who made over a certain amount. You weren't supposed to get any money. Well, once the bill actually went to conference, that was removed. So some of this is just part of how the sausage is made. I don't expect to agree with everything that Democrats do. I don't expect to even agree with everything that Republicans do, but sausage is made. And at the end, what we want is for some good meat to come out of that. So yes, there are things that we can debate. There are things that we can talk about. But I think that Republicans they do have the right mindset on not incentivizing people to just stay at home. And I think, as you said, if you're making $15 an hour, why go back to work?
Well, see, that difference in mindset that I think that we have between the parties, because in the Republicans' minds, they think, oh, these people are just sitting around collecting this extra money from the government, even though we just gave Boeing the airline industry $28 billion, we gave the hotel industry billions of dollars, we're giving the military defense industry billions of dollars to prop them up while they're out of work and nobody's in their industries. But oh no, a poor person might have $600 extra. Instead of eating spam, they might eat a pork chop this week. We got to snatch that out of their mouth and get them back to work so they can get this corona and get them into the hospital, into the ICU beds. It's a ridiculous argument. You know why? Because if you take that supplemental income away from people, guess what happens? Now they can't pay their rent. So now they go into eviction. So those small landlords who depend on rental income that comes from that supplemental money, now they have a bunch of empty properties they still have to pay on, which leads to a foreclosure crisis because they can no longer pay the mortgages on their properties. So it trickles up the economy. We are completely fine in this country with supplementing rich people and making sure that they can stay on top and they have no problems. But if it comes to poor people getting an extra sandwich or a little kid getting like a coat or a jacket or something, you got to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, have some personal responsibility, get out there and work. We ain't giving you an extra $5 or $6 an hour. Come on up, get out here and work. And I think it's a ridiculous set of ridiculous argument, because guess what? That same argument was made by Ted Cruz when they had the initial round of stimulus spending and the $600 unemployment benefits were in there, and they were under the assumption that we would be back at full employment by now, 4 months later. We are not, because the economy is still closed, because the virus is still here. So it's not as if we're in a place where people can even go back to work if they wanted to, because in most places, restaurants are closed. Those waitress jobs, those fundamental frontline jobs do not exist. So taking $500 a week away from people in the middle of a pandemic for no apparent reason other than to be mean and petty to force them back into dangerous frontline jobs seems to be what the Republican Party believes in, because they have to somehow stay true to this fiscal conservative creed that only exists when you're dealing with poor people.
Well, as far as restaurants are concerned, I can look at DC as another example. Our restaurants are open. Our restaurants have been open for a while. You're talking about $7.25 an hour. I vehemently disagree with the notion that the government should be there to push your $7 an hour to $15 an hour. Even
would you also agree that the government
there should be an actual limit on how long, not just how long, but how much you're going to get out of this. Unfortunately, there are people who do make $7.25 an hour. That is unfortunate, but there are local governments. Maybe there are things that local governments should be doing as opposed to the federal government. I reject the notion, and this shouldn't be even a Republican thing. When I was a Democrat, I felt the very same things, that the government should not be there as the answer as to what fixes our lives. I don't believe that at all. There are a lot of opportunities that we can take advantage of, but we just don't. So when we get to the point where we're saying that because people are out of work, the federal government needs to step in, because let's be clear, if there was no pandemic and these people were getting unemployment, they would still have to pay rent. They would still have to pay childcare. The poor people that you're talking about, if they were unemployed, they still get that same $200, $300, $400 a week in their unemployment claim. So the fact that now we're in a pandemic is not why they can't afford this. If they were unemployment without the pandemic, they would still be facing the same things. And I don't think that the government should say, simply because people are unemployed, that the government should say, well, you know what, I know you can't get a job, but let the federal government should give you more money. I don't agree with that at all.
But why don't we have those same rules for the airline industry, for the hotel industry, for the banking industry?
They're providing a service. They're providing a service, and we saw what happened in 2007 with the was that 2007? Yeah, 2007, 2008, 2007 with the the economic crash. People were asking then, well, why are we saving? Why is Bush giving $700 million for this TARP program? Why did Obama come in and give another $800 or $900 million? Why did they do that? Well, because there was this notion that there was this thing called too big to fail. So what happens if if the financial sector goes under? Well, can you imagine what happened if the government said we're not going to give any type of financial infusion into these industries to really build up the auto bailout that Barack Obama loved to talk about? He bailed out GM. Well, that was part of that thing. So to your question as to why does the federal government have winners and losers and things like that when it comes to, well, because as Barack Obama said, these things actually were too big to fail. So he gave money to the auto industry to really build up the auto industry so they can come back. And they did bounce back. But we can't just say, well, because you are in the financial sector, you're in the airline, then you can just drop dead. Many of these people actually use this. They provide a service that unfortunately one person who works in a restaurant does not.
And see, that's the difference in the ideology that I think that we have, because you think the airlines or the banking industry, the auto industry, that those industries are too big to fail. I think that a single mother who's working 3 jobs and who has to drive Uber at night, who has to make ends meet in order to take care of her children and to raise a family, I think that she is too big to fail. I think that student who is working the night shift and doing everything that they can to get by, they are too big to fail. I think that middle class family that's trying to figure out how to put their kid through college, they are too big to fail. And we're going to balance the budget on the back of the poorest people in this country and then blame them for not pulling themselves up by their own bootstraps by saying they don't have personal responsibility. We've already given away all the loot and the booty of this country and all of the values of this nation to the rich. Then that is why we have many of the issues that we have. And Republicans have to come to a reckoning that you can't go around saying that you're the party of manufacturing, you're the party of the middle class, you're the party of the working class, you're the anti-elitist party, when you're saying we are here to save the auto industry and the banking industry and the airline industry, but you, that working class family, you are not big enough for us to save. You get the final word. We've been at it for an hour. Go ahead, Melik.
Well, that's literally not what I said, and that's not what Republicans are saying either. As we know, just as this last stimulus bill, there was the $600 there. The notion that if there's not a $600 attached to this bill, that somehow we shouldn't take care of actual industries, not people who work at certain jobs, because these people who work at many of these jobs, well, how it was supposed to work, these companies that got these loans during this pandemic, they were supposed to bring their workers back. That was one of the conditions for the loan. So the idea that Republicans aren't concerned about these things, no, that's not true at all. Republicans actually work with Democrats to pass a bill, and they're going to work with Democrats to pass a bill this time around. When it comes to numbers, we always go back and forth of, is this too much? Is this too little? Because that's exactly how the sausage is made. So I think we have to give at least, you have to give Republicans some credit for coming to the table with solutions. You may not agree with all of those solutions, but to say that they don't care, no, I'm not going to feed into that. I don't think that, I think that I know that Democrats care. I know that Republicans care. It's not an easy answer to it. It's great for us to sit back and say, well, this is what I would have done where we're not in those actual positions. Just like the schools, the mayors, even in DC, they're talking about a hybrid approach with bringing some kids back maybe 2 days a week, and you have your older students who may do 100% virtual at all. There are people who are criticizing the mayor saying, how dare you consider opening up these schools, but we're not in her position. So I think that we have to put ourselves not just in our own personal tribal shoes, but we have to look at it from the other side. And until we start doing more of that, where we're considering from both sides of the aisle, we're just going to be stuck in our tribes and say it's either my way or the highway.
All right, Melik, how can people follow you on social media? And we got to do this again next week. I think we're going to keep this rolling.
Oh, this is great. Black on both sides. You can't get any better than that. It was Most Def, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was a great album. Hope we don't get sued.
Well, I hope we don't either. But you can find me on Facebook, Melik Abdul, Melik Abdul, and the same name on both Twitter and Instagram. You just put in an underscore at the end. So Instagram and Twitter, Melik Abdul underscore.
All right, thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. The first episode of Black on Both Sides. We'll be back next week.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you.